The prisoner had his 10 fingers stabbed, and was then forced into the cold water. He couldn't last even 5 minutes. Nagy used this method to test many people, and as a result, none of them could endure more than 5 minutes. The lieutenant, disbelieving, took off his outer coat and went into the water. But no matter how resilient he was, he couldn't last more than 10 minutes. He conducted this harsh experiment simply to confirm whether the soldier with the injured leg could survive crossing this icy strait. It's important to note that even in summer, swimming across this strait takes more than 20 minutes. The lieutenant, suffering from the cold, finally determined that Jan could not have possibly survived swimming across that frigid strait. Therefore, he changed the number of captured individuals in the report from 11 to 12. However, he didn't know that Jan not only withstood the freezing sea water, but even an avalanche couldn't take him. After enduring a series of difficult and dangerous challenges, he not only escaped the German pursuit but also successfully delivered secret documents back to England. This is a true event that occurred during World War II. On April 9, 1940, Nazi Germany invaded Norway. Hitler established fortifications in Norway and set up air, warship, and submarine bases in the north. The United Kingdom trained 12 Norwegian soldiers and sent them to Norway to carry out missions to sabotage German aircraft and equipment. This was historically known as Operation Martin. As they were preparing to land, their previous contact person had inexplicably died. The new contact, upon receiving information, immediately betrayed them. Their boat was consequently captured by the German forces. Although they resisted fiercely, facing an overwhelmingly superior enemy, the consequence of their resistance was only utter annihilation. Therefore, the captain ordered everyone to jump into the sea. Afterwards, he lit a fuse to destroy all evidence and secret documents. As he was about to jump into the boat, he found his leg caught in a net. Seeing the fuse about to burn out, in a desperate moment, Jan took off his shoes and freed himself from the entanglement, thus allowing him to jump into the sea and avoid the German bombardment. Unexpectedly, as soon as he crawled ashore, the German forces surrounded them. 11 soldiers were captured on the spot. One comrade who refused to kneel was immediately shot dead. 2 others hid behind a rock, thinking they could escape, but turned around to find guns pointed at their heads. Their comrades hoped Jan wouldn't let them die in vain. And so, he could only watch helplessly as his comrades were taken away. Jan intended to retrieve a document bag nearby, but before he could even stand up, a German soldier picked it up. As the lieutenant interrogated them, Jan seized the opportunity to flee into the mountains, but he hadn't gone far before he was spotted by the German forces. Facing the enemy, Jan hid behind a rock, preparing to resist, but when he drew his gun, he found it was frozen. He slammed the gun against the rock, found the right moment to shoot down 2 enemies, and then fled into the mountains again. But the ground was covered entirely in snow, and with only one shoe, he couldn't run fast. Then, unfortunately, he was shot in the leg by a German soldier. Blood stained the white snow crimson. But even so, Jan didn't stop. The German forces followed the bloodstains to track him. However, when they reached the lake, there were only bloodstains on the ground, and no sign of Jan. As the German soldiers searched high and low, Jan took this opportunity to climb the rocky mountain. Although walking on the rocks was very painful, at least it didn't leave bloody footprints. By nightfall, Jan finally had a chance to rest, quickly checked the wound on his foot, and put the remaining sock on his injured foot. But the German forces relentlessly pursued him, even firing many flares into the sky to find him. Under the blinding light of the flares, Jan was exposed in broad daylight, with nowhere left to hide. He had no choice but to plunge into the sea. When his life was threatened, no matter how cold the seawater was, it couldn't stop him. The German soldiers who chased him simply put their hands in the water and found it unbearably cold. They believed that no one could survive crossing this frigid strait. So, they gave up the pursuit of Jan. But in reality, Jan not only swam to the opposite shore but also miraculously survived. However, because his body had been in the deep, cold water for too long, his life force gradually dwindled. Just as he was on the verge of freezing to death, he saw a boat, and the people on board were Norwegians. Unwilling to see their compatriot freeze to death, they took Jan home. And so, Jan miraculously clung to life. The lieutenant examined the documents and found photographs of the 12 men from this operation. He held the photo, comparing each face, and discovered one person missing. The lieutenant quickly explained, he was chased by us into the icy strait, where the seawater was below zero, and he was also wounded, so he couldn't have survived. But the lieutenant insisted, if alive, I must see the person, if dead, I must see the body. After that, he ordered the lieutenant to investigate all the farms in the area, especially doctors, nurses, or midwives, and any families with literate members. The next morning, Jan was taken across the strait by the fisherman from the previous night, who led him to a doctor's house, hoping his leg could be treated. John's sudden appearance startled the old woman. Unfortunately, the doctor was not home. John intended to leave, but the old woman saw him limping and called the doctor's wife back. After bandaging his wound, she said, "You must get timely treatment. If red blood streaks appear on your leg, you must go to the hospital immediately, or you will die." When she learned he wanted to rescue his comrades, the doctor's wife advised him to go to Hansen's house. Hansen's wife was a nurse and could help him with treatment. "I once saved their daughter, their family are all good people." But before they could say another word, German soldiers arrived for inspection. While the old woman was trying to cope, Jan quickly hid behind a pile of snow. After confirming that the German soldiers had left, he ran to Hansen's house. Meanwhile, the lieutenant was still tracking Jan's whereabouts, but no matter how much torture he used, none of Jan's comrades revealed his name. The lieutenant reminded him that their superiors were still waiting for the report on this operation. The lieutenant didn't believe Jan would freeze to death, so he began an experiment. He forced each of Jan's comrades to go into the water to see how long they could last. The results disappointed him. No one could last more than 5 minutes. Still disbelieving after leaving the water, the lieutenant took off his outer coat and went into the water. In the end, he also couldn't last 10 minutes. John evaded soldiers checking on the road, crossed the freezing coastline, traversed the snow-capped mountains, and finally reached Hansen's house. Seeing a stranger approach, Hansen rushed out with a gun. Johann, scared, held his head with both hands and knelt on the ground. At this point, the locals had heard the story of the 12th man escaping. At first, Jan didn't want to admit he was the 12th man, but when he received their concern, he lowered his guard. Besides, 2 of his comrades were in Hansen's wife's hospital. After enduring torture, they had been taken to the hospital. 2 people had already been tortured to death. The remaining 9 would be executed that night. This news was like a bolt from the blue for Jan. But as he was in immense despair, Hansen's daughter came and gave him a hand-drawn map, encouraging him to overcome the difficulties. Jan, in desperation, realized that if he couldn't save his comrades, he had to find a way to escape the German forces. Looking at the map in front of him, he remembered that Sweden was a neutral country. As long as he crossed the border into Sweden, he would surely survive. His comrades, who were with him on the mission, were now standing before a pit. They all knew death was next, but no one knelt to beg. They even sang a tragic song. They believed that Nagy would surely be defeated and their nation would surely be liberated. When the gunshots rang out, the 9 soldiers fell to the ground, and Nagy treated them like animals, kicking them into the pit. Then he ordered the soldiers to fire many more shots to ensure no one survived. The next morning, before setting off, Jan tore the girl's name from the map. If he were unfortunately captured, he wouldn't implicate Hansen's family. Then he took the map and found the fisherman Hansen had recommended. With the fisherman's help, he took a boat to Sweden. At this point, red blood streaks had appeared on his leg. But unfortunately, there were no treatment facilities there. The fisherman said he would take him to Smam. Although the Germans were heavily guarding there, he had to pass through it to reach Sweden. They are guarding the coast, they definitely won't expect him to pass through there. If he successfully reaches Sweden, he will defeat the lieutenant known by the nickname "Even a mosquito cannot escape his grasp." Due to the shallow water near the shore, the boat couldn't get close enough for Jan to get dry. The fisherman jumped into the sea and carried him on his shoulders. For the invaded Norwegian people, Jan's survival represented a hope for victory. After landing, Jan stepped onto a ski and prepared to cross the mountain slope to Sweden. His arduous journey had just begun. Alone amidst the vast white snow mountains, his tiny body was like a dark speck in the majestic nature. Meanwhile, the lieutenant, chilled to the bone, finally gave up on changing the report from 11 people to 12. But even though he had submitted the report, he hadn't seen a body, and the lieutenant couldn't accept it. On the 7th day after his escape, Jan skied to Dream. Seeing the concentrated German forces, he felt a little worried. As a result, he accidentally slipped and fell to the ground, almost hitting a car parked by the road. Seeing someone approaching, Jan quickly got up and left, but the person behind him called him back. Unexpectedly, this person was the very lieutenant who wanted to capture him. The lieutenant handed him a hat. Fortunately, he didn't recognize January. After putting on the hat, Jan didn't dare to linger and quickly left. The lieutenant returned, feeling something was unusual. A normal civilian wouldn't risk walking on a mountain road. This means the person is likely the missing 12th man. As Johann reached the mountain peak, a plane suddenly swept over his head, then turned back. John realized he had been spotted and quickly sped up, but in such a vast mountainous area, Jan had nowhere to hide. Like a target, the plane fired at January. Jan agilely jumped to one side, avoiding the bullets. But when the plane turned back, he sped down the mountain slope. Although the next attack didn't hit him, the strong impact caused an avalanche. Jan lost a ski pole and could only desperately slide down, but still couldn't escape the blizzard. Wherever the avalanche reached, trees collapsed. The pilot, seeing this, withdrew, then returned to the camp to report the situation to the lieutenant. John was now stuck on a tree branch. Although still alive, he was severely injured, rolling many times on the ground, causing him to vomit profusely. After a period of rest, he used his still-moving arms to painfully crawl out of the snow. Because he knew the Germans would definitely come back to find him, as long as he could breathe, he had to move forward. After crawling out, his fingernails had all fallen off, and his eyes were bloodshot. At this moment, the afternoon sun shone on him like an oil painting carved from nature. But such beautiful scenery spurred his death. Because once the sun set, he would face the danger of freezing to death. So Jan still struggled to move forward. To encourage himself, he even saw himself constantly cheering, encouraging, persevere. But his current strength no longer allowed it. He couldn't even cross a river, he could only let his feet soak in the icy water. By the time he crawled out, his feet were frozen. His body had reached its limit. But he still persevered, determined not to give up, because his fallen comrades were still waiting for the day of victory. Just like that, he walked like a walking corpse, traversing knee-deep snow for 3 days. When he staggered to a nearby farm, the German forces were also checking there. It turned out that after Jan crawled out of the snow, the German forces couldn't find his body, so they indeed came back to search. Although they didn't find the body, they found the map, and they were also certain that Jan was not dead. Because of the large-scale search by the German forces, everyone knew the escapee was a Norwegian, he was a hero of Norway, and also the hope of Norway. Therefore, when asked if they had seen any sign of Jan, the locals not only didn't reveal anything but also covered for him. After the German forces left, he and his sister ran to help January. At this moment, opening the door and seeing food, Jan crammed it into his mouth, but before he could eat a few bites, he fainted to the ground. The Maria siblings ran to check his health and found that he not only had broken bones all over his body but also a severe infection in his leg wound. They couldn't believe how Jan had survived. After simple treatment and bandaging, Jan escaped the clutches of death. A few days later, under the dedicated care of the locals, John regained consciousness, but he still didn't know where he was when he heard the sound of car engines outside. The lieutenant couldn't find the body and assumed John must be at this farm because it was closest to the avalanche area. So, he personally led his men to search. He quickly went straight into the barn, while John was hiding under a pile of straw. The two Marius brothers stood outside, their hearts pounding with worry. But just as the lieutenant was about to climb to the second floor, his metal button got caught and broke off. This was the greatest glory in his military career and something he couldn't afford to lose. So, he didn't even check and immediately jumped down to look for the medal. And so, Jan also escaped the pursuit. But the Marius brothers knew he couldn't stay there long. So, under the cover of darkness, they took Jan to a house by the lake. Before leaving, Marius left candles and sweet potatoes, as well as a bottle of liquor to warm him up. Marius told Jan to stay there and rest for a few days and promised to find a way to get him to Sweden. After Marius left, Jan became disoriented from constantly being on high alert and the pain throughout his body. He either dreamed of being captured by the German forces or being attacked by wild dogs. He realized that if he continued like this, it wouldn't work. So, he took off his socks and used a knife to cut the bandage. As each layer of bandage was removed, a foul odor filled the air, his injured foot had turned black. If it wasn't immediately amputated, it would spread throughout his body. So, he opened the bottle of liquor, poured it onto the knife to sterilize it, then took a sip, bit down hard on a piece of cloth, and slowly cut bit by bit. After the first agonizing cut, he was drenched in sweat from the pain. Looking at his other black toe, he took another sip of liquor, suppressed the pain, and began to cut. Jan pulled at his toe, sweat pouring like rain. He stuffed the decaying toe into a crack in the wall. After bandaging his foot, he fainted. When Marius arrived, he had been there for 12 days. When he learned that Jan had amputated his own toe without anesthesia, Marius couldn't imagine the pain Jan must have endured. But Marius had found a way to get Jan to Sweden. They disassembled the boat, assembled it into a snow sled, and tied Jan onto it. They not only had to climb over dozens of snow-covered mountains but also constantly avoid the pursuit of German planes. After a day of effort, they reached the rendezvous point. After placing Jan under a rock, they quickly left. Because people from the farm couldn't be away for too long, or the German forces would become suspicious. They had expected to be able to lie there quietly and wait for support, but unexpectedly, the ice melted, and water flowed into the sleeping bag. The sleeping bag became soaked, but Jan was tied up and couldn't move, only able to shiver helplessly. Suddenly, he saw the blue light of the aurora borealis, and he remembered his mother once saying, "If you see the aurora borealis, you're not far from home." Perhaps remembering the warmth of family, Jan gazed at the magical natural phenomenon and slowly closed his eyes, falling asleep. 4 days later, Marius, who was embroidering blood-stained fabric, guessed that Jan was in a Swedish hospital, surrounded by nurses. And as they rejoiced, the support leader suddenly appeared. It turned out he hadn't found January. After confirming, he realized the contact person had given the wrong location. After 4 days, John might have already become a frozen corpse. Therefore, Marius quickly brought experienced medical personnel up the mountain. When they reached that rock, John was covered by a thick layer of snow. Marius quickly shoveled away the snow and found that he was no longer breathing. He felt incredibly remorseful. I must not have explained the location clearly. But at that moment, Jan slowly opened his eyes. He had miraculously come back to life. Seeing this, Marius quickly pulled him out, then had his companions provide him with water and food. Marius asked, "Jan, when did you eat all the food?" Jan picked up a sugar candy and said, "I haven't finished all the food yet. One lick is breakfast, this side is lunch, this side is dinner. If you hadn't come, I could have lasted until the weekend." Indeed, Jan maintained his life through his optimistic spirit and persistent will. Overcoming the dark night, after marking the location, Marius left. Jan continued to lie there, waiting for support. He continued to wait for 6 days. It turned out that the support team encountered a blizzard. This was their fastest speed. Jan had been lying under this rock for 10 days. Jan had been on the run for 36 days. Throughout this arduous journey, Jan faced a series of different challenges every day. This time, he had to confront a blizzard. Even though the support team tried their best, the blizzard was too intense, and they could only turn back and shelter in a cave. During the move, Jan, being too weak, fell asleep. When he woke up, he found he still hadn't reached Sweden, and he finally couldn't bear it anymore. He said, "To have made it this far is already a miracle. I must reach Sweden to bring intelligence back to England." The support team naturally understood this, and it was precisely because of Jan that they risked their lives and did their utmost to help him. The support team promised, "We will definitely take you to Sweden, but the blizzard is too strong now, and the Germans also know you are heading to Sweden, so they have increased border patrols. If we risk crossing now, it would be like rushing to our deaths. Therefore, until there is a safe way to proceed, you must stay here." With no other choice, Johan could only wait. The Norwegian locals took turns visiting him. Some bandaged his wounds, others brought food. Although these different individuals did not draw the attention of the German forces, Jan's health was steadily deteriorating. If this continued, it was doubtful he would survive until he reached Sweden. Therefore, as the ice was about to melt, the support team began their operation. Jan had now been in the cave for 17 days. The support team told him, "Now is the annual large-scale reindeer training period. We will put you on a sled and have a well-trained reindeer pull you to the border. This method is a bit risky but also the best option." Marius's sister suddenly remembered that she had given Jan a handkerchief, and her name was embroidered on it. If the German forces discovered it, they would be in danger. Therefore, the two siblings took a boat to the wooden house, but before they could even search, German soldiers arrived by boat. The two siblings were immediately subdued. Not long after, the lieutenant received the news and also flew in, finding Jan's toe in a crack in the wall. To force out Jan's whereabouts, the lieutenant beat Marius. They had to capture Jan themselves, or the previous report would incriminate them. Meanwhile, Jan began a new escape. German soldiers at the border saw a herd of animals running towards them and stood up to observe, but due to their large number and fast speed, they couldn't spot January. But just as Jan thought the plan had succeeded, he once again felt despair because the sled's fastening rope had come loose. He wanted to pull the rope, but it was too late. The momentum threw him tumbling. Already severely injured, his body now had no intact parts, but he relied on his strong will to survive, flipped the sled back over, then took off his gloves and pushed it with his hands. Without the cover of the reindeer herd, Jan was spotted by the guard. Fortunately, he slid downhill before the German soldier could fire. He found a rock to hide behind, but this was only prolonging his life because the Germans quickly caught up. Jan knew he no longer had the strength to fight, so he drew his gun, preparing to use his last bullet to end his life. But just as he was about to pull the trigger, there was suddenly the sound of an animal beside him. To his surprise, it was the well-trained reindeer that had run back. Jan knew he only had one last chance. So, he quickly tied the rope to the ski and held it tightly in his hand. Then, he fired his gun into the sky. The soldiers heard the gunshot and lay down. The reindeer, startled, also bolted and ran. The sled was pulled like an arrow, speeding past the German soldiers. This scene left the soldiers dumbfounded. But by the time they reacted, Jan was long gone. The reindeer pulled Jan through a hail of bullets and finally crossed the border between the two countries. Here, Jan had a race against death. Finally, the person in charge arrived, excitedly saying, "You're safe." But his arm, gripping the rope, was frozen stiff, and the support team could only pry each finger loose. Meanwhile, the lieutenant was furious when he heard that Jan had escaped, and then he went into the cold water. 3 months later, Jan, having escaped death, gradually recovered. He also completed the secret documents and personally delivered them to his superiors. Thank you. Even though the journey was fraught with difficulties, Jan never gave up the fight. Since then, he continued to serve his country, training new recruits. Until Norway was completely liberated, although the Marius brothers were discovered, they were not executed. After the war ended, the lieutenant was also sentenced to death. The movie, The 12th Man, is adapted from a true story. The original work is Norwegian people's hero John Bassarus. Do you think today's movie was good? If you think it was good, comment 1. If you think it was just normal, comment 2. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye and see you again.